A chase that got out of control, a police officer seriously injured, and a dog that refuses to let its owner go. What happened that night no one can explain, but when Camila Torres, on the verge of death, is brought back against all odds, a question arises that no one can answer: how was this possible? Before we start this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any stories. Camila Torres adjusted her bulletproof vest as she watched Apollo, her faithful German shepherd, sitting next to her in the police car. The dog's attentive gaze revealed his readiness, as if he could sense that something important was about to happen. Camila stroked her partner's ears. "Ready for another day, boy?" he asked with a slight smile. Apollo responded with a movement of his tail, always willing to follow his owner on any mission, regardless of the danger. The routine that morning had started calmly. Camila and Apollo patrolled the city's busy streets, where people went about their lives. But then, the car's radio broadcast an urgent message. "Attention, units. Robbery in progress on Avenida Central. Suspects armed and on the run." Camila looked at Apollo. "Time to work," he said. She turned on the sirens and sped towards the scene. Red and blue lights reflected off the windows of buildings as pedestrians quickly moved out of the way. The roar of the car's engine echoed through the city streets. When they arrived at the bank, the scene was already in chaos. Armed criminals ran towards a stolen car, shooting without hesitation at police officers who tried to approach. Camila felt her heart racing, but her training kicked in. "Apollo, stay alert," he ordered, while preparing the plan to intercept the escape. The criminal's vehicle took off at high speed, and Camila quickly followed behind. Apollo, even in the back seat, maintained an alert posture, with his eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if he understood the importance of the moment. The chase had begun, and there was no room for error. Camila dodged cars and pedestrians while the radio provided updates on the escape route. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. It was just the beginning of a mission that would prove to be much more dangerous than she could have imagined. Apollo let out a small growl when he noticed the criminals shooting back. Camila pursed her lips, focused on maintaining control of the car and protecting her faithful partner. "I knew that this chase wouldn't be just another ordinary day. Something big was coming." The sound of sirens filled the air, as Camila and Apollo prepared to face the unknown together. Their fate was about to change, but no matter what, they would face each obstacle as they always had, side by side. The car's engine roared as Camila sped through the narrow, congested streets. The criminals in front did everything they could to escape, cutting into cars and breaking into red lights. Apollo, in the back seat, kept his gaze fixed on the vehicle in front, attentive to every movement. He knew the mission was far from over. "Come on, boy. We have to catch up to them," Camila whispered, her eyes determined, as she maneuvered between the cars. The radio chirped with an update. "Attention, Camila. The suspects are heavily armed. Proceed with caution." She gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just a chase, lives were at risk. Apollo sniffed the air as if he could feel the tension, and his presence, silent and constant, gave Camila the strength she needed to continue. Suddenly, the criminals accelerated and entered a busy avenue, narrowly avoiding a bus. Camila didn't hesitate and followed them closely. The streets were full of pedestrians and other vehicles, which made everything even more risky. Every second counted, and there was no room for error. Apollo let out a low growl, as if he sensed something was about to happen. Camila took a quick look in the rearview mirror. His eyes met the dog's for a brief moment. "Calm down, friend. Let's get them," she said with forced confidence. The criminals started throwing things out the window, forcing Camila to dodge to avoid the shots. Apollo, tense, remained firm on the bench. The pursuit continued relentlessly through increasingly narrower streets. Camila maneuvered with precision, avoiding obstacles while keeping the suspect's car in sight. "We won't let you escape," she muttered to herself, stepping on the accelerator. The criminals tried to lose them in every way, entering alleys and making sudden turns. But Camilla and Apollo were determined not to give up. With each turn, the distance between them decreased. Apollo stood up on the bench with each maneuver, as if he were ready to act at any moment. Then, suddenly, the thieves entered a side street and Camilla realized that they were heading towards a crowded shopping area. Her heart sank. If they weren't quick and precise, innocent people could get hurt. The tension was increasing, but Camilla knew she couldn't hesitate. With an agile movement, she maneuvered the car to partially block the criminals' passage. They were too close to give up now. Apollo was ready. They both knew that no matter what happened, they would face whatever danger came their way together. And the chase had just begun. The criminal's vehicle was advancing through the streets, and Camilla knew she needed to be precise to prevent their escape without putting civilians at risk. Apollo was restless, growling low in the back seat. It was as if he sensed things were about to get worse. The bandits began throwing objects through the window, nails, small boxes, and bags that exploded in smoke when they hit the ground. They were fake bombs, but enough to cause panic in the streets and make pursuit difficult. Camilla had to act quickly, swerving to avoid collisions as people fled in all directions. "Stay strong, Apollo," he shouted, holding the steering wheel tightly. The smoke made visibility difficult, but Camilla kept her gaze fixed on the suspect's car. The chase took them to a commercial area, full of shacks and pedestrians. Camilla held her breath for a moment. Any wrong maneuver there could be fatal. The criminals threw the car into the crowded market, knocking over stalls and scaring customers. Camilla had no choice, she would have to follow them. With skill, he avoided the obstacles while he heard Apollo whine softly, eager to take action. She sped up, staying close to the bandit's car. Adrenaline was running through his veins. "They're not going to escape," he thought, as he turned the steering wheel to avoid a stack of boxes that had been knocked over in the path. Every second felt like an eternity, and she knew she needed to end it quickly. Then, without warning, the criminals braked sharply, forcing Camilla to turn to avoid a direct collision. But the maneuver wasn't fast enough. Camilla's car hit the back of the bandit's vehicle, and the impact was violent. The vehicle shook, and Camilla and Apollo were thrown forward. Pain radiated through Camilla's body, but she held tight to the steering wheel, trying to maintain control. In the back seat, Apollo let out a short, high-pitched bark, indicating that he was unharmed, although alert. The collision caused both cars to skid until they stopped at an intersection. Camilla barely had time to recover before she saw the bandits get out of the car with weapons in their hands. She instinctively reached for her belt to grab her gun, but before she could react, the criminals were on top of them, forcing her to get out of the car. "Get out of the car!" shouted one of them, pointing the gun at Camilla and Apollo. Camilla exchanged a quick glance with her canine partner. She knew that Apollo was prepared to act, but she also knew that any false move could cost her dearly. Apollo growled, showing his teeth, but Camilla murmured, "Calm down, boy. Wait for the right moment." The siege was closed. She and Apollo were now hostages amidst the chaos. The mission, which had previously seemed like just another chase, had turned into a much more dangerous situation, and it was far from over. Camilla and Apollo were surrounded. The criminals pointed their weapons at them, while the tension in the air increased. Apollo remained next to his owner, his muscles tense and his gaze fixed on the bandits, ready to act at the slightest sign. However, Camilla knew that any rash move would put their lives at risk. "If they try anything, they're dead," said one of the criminals, with a menacing smile. Camilla took a deep breath, remaining calm. She needed to find a way out of that situation, but without putting Apollo in danger. His instinct told him that patience would be his best ally. Every second seemed like an eternity, and the only certainty was that Apollo was ready to defend her at any cost. "And the dog, what do we do with him?" asked one of the bandits. "If he moves, you know what to do," replied the group leader, holding the gun firmly. Apollo let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the criminals. Camilla knew he was just waiting for a signal from her to act. But at that moment, she needed to buy time. "Easy, boy, calm down," Camilla murmured softly, keeping her tone firm, but controlled. As they were pushed away from the car, Camilla analyzed the possibilities. The bandits were tense, time was playing against them. She knew that sooner or later they would make a mistake. The question was, could she and Apollo survive until then? Then, the moment of tension broke. One of the bandits, nervous about Apollo's behavior, got too close with the intention of intimidating him. It was the mistake Camilla expected. "No!" shouted the leader, but it was too late. With a quick jump, Apollo threw himself at the man, knocking him to the ground. The sound of fighting filled the air, with the bandit desperately trying to fend off the dog, but Apollo was agile and lethal. Camilla took advantage of the chaos. With a quick movement, he knocked down the nearest criminal and grabbed his gun. "Put your weapons down," he ordered, his voice firm and implacable. The bandits hesitated for a second, surprised by the turn of events. That second was enough for Apollo to recover and intimidate the group with a fierce bark. Before the criminals could react, police sirens began to echo through the streets, approaching quickly. The leader of the bandits cursed and ordered them to retreat. Amidst the confusion, they ran to the car and fled. Camilla fell to her knees, her shoulder throbbing in pain, as Apollo returned to her side, licking her face, as if to assure her that she was okay. "Good work, friend, good work," Camilla whispered, petting the German shepherd. The blue and red lights of the vehicles illuminated the street, and reinforcements finally arrived. But the danger had not yet passed. Camilla knew that this was just the beginning. Camilla tried to get up, but the pain in her shoulder was intense. She brought her hand to the spot and felt the blood slowly seeping through her fingers. Apollo, attentive, remained by her side, licking her face as if he wanted to keep her awake. The pain was strong, but Camilla knew she couldn't pass out. "Calm down, boy. I'm here," he whispered, stroking Apollo's head. The sirens echoed down the street and the police began to surround the place, but the criminals had barely escaped. Camilla felt the adrenaline leaving her body, replaced by exhaustion. His vision began to blur, but Apollo was still there, growling at anyone who approached, as if to say, "Don't touch her. We have an injured police officer here. We need an ambulance," shouted one of the agents who approached. Camilla tried to speak, but her voice was weak. He felt the firm touch of a police officer pressing his shoulder to stop the bleeding. Apollo, suspicious, remained beside her, like a watchful shadow, not letting anyone get too close. "All right, friend. We're here to help," said the police officer, carefully extending his hand to Apollo. The German shepherd let out a low growl but allowed the officer to approach. He seemed to understand that the priority was to save his owner. Minutes later, the ambulance arrived, and Camilla was carefully placed on the stretcher. Apollo tried to go up with him, but was stopped by one of the police officers. "Hey, buddy. You're coming in the next car, okay?" said the agent, stroking the dog's head. Apollo let out a low whine, but reluctantly obeyed. He didn't take his eyes off Camilla as she was placed in the ambulance and the doors closed. The sound of sirens became distant as the vehicle drove away through the city's bright streets. The police officer accompanying Apollo placed him in the back seat of the vehicle and accelerated, following the ambulance. The German shepherd remained restless, with his ears alert and his eyes fixed on the road. Every turn, every stop was a reminder that he needed to get to his owner's side soon. calm down, boy. She's going to be fine, the police officer said, trying to comfort him. But Apollo didn't seem to hear. His focus was only on one thing, being by Camilla's side, no matter what the cost. The distant sound of the ambulance and the city lights flashing past the windows were irrelevant. All that mattered was that he wouldn't let Camilla out of his sight. When they arrived at the hospital, Apollo jumped out of the car and ran towards the entrance. A nurse tried to stop him, but the police officer intervened. "Leave him alone. He won't leave here until she's okay." And so, Apollo waited at the door of the emergency room, with his eyes fixed and his body tense. He knew that this was just the beginning of the fight to get Camilla back. Inside the hospital, the medical team worked frantically to stabilize Camilla. His shoulder wound was severe and the blood loss was significant. She was placed in a medically induced coma to allow her body to recover, but doctors did not hide their uncertainty about her condition. It was a race against time. While Camilla was taken to the ICU, Apollo refused to leave the hospital entrance. The police officer who accompanied him tried to take him to a waiting room, but Apollo resisted, planting his paws on the floor, determined not to move away from the person he loved most. "That dog is stubborn," commented one of the nurses. "No, he is loyal," replied the policeman. Apollo maintained tireless vigil, sitting in front of the ICU door, with his ears pricked up and his gaze fixed on the entrance. Hours passed, but the dog didn't move. He ignored the noises of the hospital and the movement of nurses and doctors rushing past. His mind was stuck on one thing, waiting for Camilla. During the night, a nurse brought food and water to Apollo, but he did not eat. The policeman came back to try to take him away, but Apollo completely ignored him. It was as if he knew that leaving there would mean abandoning Camilla, and that was something he would never do. News of the dog guarding the ICU door quickly spread throughout the hospital. Patients and staff were moved by the scene, the German shepherd sitting motionless, vigilant, as if his presence was essential for Camilla to return. On the second day, exhaustion began to take its toll on Apollo. Still, he refused to rest. Every time the ICU door opened, he raised his head with hope in his eyes, hoping to see his owner. But every time, it was just nurses and doctors leaving, and disappointment was evident in the dog's eyes. The days turned into an endless haze of silent wakefulness. Apollo remained there, faithful to his post, without moving. He ignored any attempt to push him away, focusing only on the door that separated him from Camilla. Then finally, on the fourth day, one of the doctors came out of the ICU with a tired but hopeful expression. Apollo stood up immediately, tail wagging gently, eyes fixed on the doctor's face. "She's still in a coma, but stable. Now, it's just a matter of time," said the doctor to the police officer who accompanied the dog. Apollo let out a low sigh and lay down in front of the door again, with his eyes attentive. He knew that the fight was not over yet. As long as Camilla fought for her life, he would remain there, faithful and vigilant. And so, night after night, Apollo kept his vigil, as if his very presence could guarantee that his owner would wake up. He knew Camilla needed him, and he would be there, no matter how long it took. The morning was silent in the hospital. The cold light from the corridors illuminated the floor as Apollo continued his tireless vigil at the ICU door. His body showed signs of tiredness, his eyes were a little closed and his movements were slower. Still, he refused to rest. Camilla hadn't woken up yet, and he knew he needed to stay there. Inside the ICU, Camilla's situation suddenly changed. His body, motionless for days, began to shake. Medical staff were hurriedly called in when monitoring machines began issuing emergency alerts. She was convulsing, and her vital signs plummeted dangerously. "Quickly! We need to stabilize her," shouted the doctor, adjusting the monitors. Apollo, outside, felt the change before anyone else. He stood up suddenly, ears perked up, and began to growl softly. Something was wrong. He could feel the danger, but he didn't understand what was happening beyond that door. With his heart racing, he scratched at the ICU door, trying to enter. The hallway was filled with nurses and doctors rushing to save Camila. Apollo began to bark desperately, his instinct telling him he needed to be by her side. He knew something very bad was happening. Inside the room, doctors tried everything to stabilize Camila. Chest compressions, 4 meds, chest shocks. Nothing seemed to work. Her vital signs kept disappearing, and her breathing became weaker by the second. "We're not getting an answer," exclaimed a nurse, adjusting the equipment. Outside, Apollo couldn't wait any longer. With a fierce bark, he lunged at the door. His entire body radiated despair and anguish. Police officers and nurses tried to restrain him, but he wouldn't stop. It was as if he knew that his presence there, next to Camila, was the only chance to save her. "Let him in," said one of the doctors, realizing that there was nothing left to lose. With the door open, Apollo ran to Camila's bed and placed his paws on her, gently licking her face. The contact with his owner's cold skin made him whimper softly, as if begging her to fight. Then something unexpected happened. In the midst of that desperate silence, Camila let out a weak sigh. The doctors looked at each other in disbelief. Then his breathing began to slowly stabilize. The heart monitor, previously almost silent, returned to emitting the rhythmic beeps of life. "She's responding," exclaimed the doctor, rushing to monitor vital signs. Apollo continued licking Camila's face, as if he wanted to assure her that she was there, that she wouldn't abandon him. The medical team worked quickly, completely stabilizing her. The tension in the air dissolved, giving way to a wave of relief and amazement. "It was close," muttered a nurse, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Apollo, exhausted but relieved, lay down next to Camila's bed, resting his head on the sheet. He knew the battle wasn't over yet, but he felt the worst was over. And finally, he closed his eyes for a few moments, resting next to his owner, sure that she was coming back to him. The sun was beginning to rise outside, dyeing the sky with soft shades of orange and gold, while inside the hospital the atmosphere was still tense. Doctors surrounded Camila's bed, closely monitoring her vital signs. Apollo remained beside her, with his head resting on the edge of the bed, attentive to his owner's every small movement. Camila was stable, but her condition was still delicate. Doctors were in disbelief at the sudden return of his vital signs after the seizure. A nurse, observing the German shepherd who had not left the bed, commented quietly, "It seems he's the reason she came back." Apollo looked at the woman, as if he understood her words, and then turned his attention to Camila. He knew she was still there, even if her eyes were closed. And he would continue to be by her side, no matter how long it took. Hours passed, and Camila began to show the first signs of consciousness. His body moved slightly, his fingers twitched, and his breathing became more regular. Apollo, attentive to every detail, suddenly stood up, wagging his tail gently. "Camila, are you listening?" asked one of the doctors with hope in his voice, while adjusting the serum. Apollo let out a small whine, moving closer to the bed. Then, for the first time since the incident, Camila moved her head and let out a soft moan. Her eyes blinked slowly, and she tried to focus her vision on her surroundings. The first face she saw was Apollo's, his eyes filled with a mix of worry and relief. He gently licked her hand, and Camila gave a small smile. The connection between the two was so powerful that they didn't need words. They both knew they had won another battle together. "Hey, girl, you came back to us," murmured the doctor, with a smile on his face. Camila tried to speak, but her voice was hoarse and weak. He felt the warmth of a nurse's hand on his arm and the comfort of Apollo's head against his chest. "It's going to be okay now," Camila whispered, running her hand lightly over the dog's head. Apollo let out a soft bark, as if responding, "I never doubted." The news of Camilla's miracle spread quickly throughout the hospital. The doctor who followed his case commented that he rarely witnessed anything like this. Everyone knew that science had done its part, but Apollo's tireless presence at her side seemed to have played a fundamental role. "This dog's loyalty is incredible," said one of the nurses to another. Camilla, still weak but conscious, slowly turned around in bed to look at Apollo. Her eyes met his, and in that silent exchange, a promise was reaffirmed: no matter what the future brought, they would face it together. Apollo lay down next to the bed, relaxing for the first time in days, but still paying attention to his owner's every movement. The battle for life had been won, but a new journey of recovery was just beginning. And so, with the soft light of dawn illuminating the hospital room, Camilla and Apollo knew that as long as they were together, there was no obstacle they couldn't overcome. The following days were a test of patience and strength for Camilla. Recovery after the coma was slow and painful. His body was weak, and every movement felt like a battle. Apollo remained by her side the entire time, like a watchful shadow, silently encouraging her to continue. The first time the physiotherapist suggested that Camilla try sitting alone in bed, she felt a crushing weight. His shoulder still hurt and his weakened body barely responded to commands. "Let's take it easy. We just want a little progress today," said the physiotherapist with an encouraging smile. Camilla took a deep breath, placing her hands on the bed and trying to lift her torso. Pain radiated from his injured shoulder, and his arms shook under the effort. She felt like giving up, but it was at that moment that Apollo placed his head on her leg, looking at her with his deep, patient eyes. "It's okay, boy. I'll make it," Camilla murmured, feeling the silent support of her faithful companion. With a new breath, she tried again. Slowly, he managed to lift his body and sit on the edge of the bed. The simple movement, which had previously seemed trivial, was now an immense victory. Apollo wagged his tail, discreetly celebrating along with her. In the following weeks, physical therapy sessions became part of the daily routine. Each exercise required a huge effort, and sometimes Camilla felt like she couldn't move forward. Apollo, however, never let her get discouraged. He followed her closely, observing each attempt and silently applauding each achievement with a look full of pride. "You have a great motivator by your side," joked the physiotherapist, seeing the German Shepherd's attentive behavior. In one of the sessions, Camilla managed to take her first step alone. Her legs were shaky and the fear of falling was real, but Apollo was there, walking beside her as if he knew her support was essential. When she reached the end of the hallway, he barked once, as if celebrating victory alongside her. At night, the pain and tiredness came with force, and the hospital fell into silence. Camilla, lying in her bed, fought against the thoughts that insisted on bringing back memories of the shooting and the danger they faced together. In the most difficult moments, Apollo would climb into bed and lie down next to her, his constant presence bringing comfort and peace. "I wouldn't have done it without you, friend," Camilla whispered, stroking the German Shepherd's head. With each passing day, she felt stronger, physically and emotionally. He knew he still had a long way to go, but with Apollo by his side, there was no doubt he would face any challenge. The journey to recovery was arduous, but every little bit of progress was celebrated. Camilla and Apollo were ready to continue, together, one step at a time. After weeks of recovery in the hospital, the day Camilla was most looking forward to finally arrived, her medical discharge. Although she was still weak and needed constant care, she was ready to leave the hospital and start her life over. Doctors reminded her of the importance of continuing physical therapy and warned her about the need to avoid intense physical exertion for some time. Apollo walked beside her as they left the hospital, wagging his tail excitedly. The German Shepherd's joy was evident, as if he understood that that moment marked the end of a difficult phase and the beginning of a new journey together. "We're free, boy," Camilla murmured, smiling as she stroked his head. Arriving home brought immense relief, but also a new reality. The family environment felt different after everything they had been through. Camilla realized that things wouldn't go back to the way they were before right away. Every small day-to-day task required effort and patience. Putting water in for coffee or opening a simple drawer were achievements that now had another meaning. Apollo, as always, was by her side. He followed every movement, attentive and ready to help in any way. When Camilla lost her balance or showed signs of pain, he would come over and press his head against her leg, offering silent comfort. That night, as they settled on the sofa, Camilla felt a mixture of relief and insecurity. She knew her recovery would be long and that the road ahead was full of challenges. But with Apollo by his side, he would face each of them. "It will be difficult, but we will do it," she said, looking at the German shepherd, who was looking at her with eyes full of understanding. In the following days, Camilla gradually resumed her routine. Physiotherapy was part of everyday life, and every small progress was a reason to celebrate. Apollo participated in each session, walking alongside her and wagging his tail excitedly with each advance. His presence made all the difference. He was more than a support dog, he was her emotional anchor. The first trip to the market was an important milestone. Camilla was anxious, but determined to reintegrate into the outside world. Apollo, with his imposing and disciplined posture, walked beside her, conveying security. Wherever they went, people looked with admiration at the duo, the police officer who survived against all odds and her faithful companion. Although the routine was still tiring and full of limitations, Camilla felt grateful for each new day. Every step taken was a victory, every small obstacle overcome strengthened the bond between her and Apollo. They had faced the darkness together and now they were ready to start over. As Camilla got ready to sleep that night, Apollo climbed into bed and lay down next to her, as he had always done since the hospital. She stroked his soft fur and whispered, "Thank you, friend. Without you, I wouldn't have made it." Apollo just closed his eyes, satisfied with being where he was supposed to be, next to her, ready for any challenge the future brought. The days of recovery turned into weeks, and Camilla began to adapt to the new routine. Returning to work was close, but this time, she saw everything from a new perspective. The experience of almost losing his life and Apollo's unshakable loyalty had changed his way of looking at the world. Before, each mission was just another task on the list of duties. Now, Camilla understood the true value of each moment. "I knew that life could change in a matter of seconds and so I was determined to make the most of my time." Next to Apollo, each day was an opportunity to start over. At the police station, her colleagues greeted her with applause and warm smiles. Many commented on her strength and determination and the crucial role Apollo played in her recovery. Camilla was surprised to realize that her story had already spread not just throughout the city, but beyond. His recovery was seen as an example of resilience and hope. "You have become an inspiration to all of us, Camilla," said one of the veteran police officers, shaking her hand. Even with the affection and recognition from her colleagues, Camilla felt that she was no longer the same person as before. She was more cautious, more aware of the dangers, and more grateful for every small victory. Now each mission was approached with a mixture of courage and prudence. She knew she couldn't put herself or Apollo at unnecessary risk again. Apollo also looked different. His behavior had subtly changed after everything they had been through. He was even more attentive, as if he had developed a special intuition for dangerous situations. On patrols and training simulations, he moved with precision and discipline, always keeping Camilla in his field of vision. They were more than a duo, they were a perfectly synchronized team. On the first patrol after their return, Camilla and Apollo walked through the city streets as if they were relearning their routine together. People greeted them and thanked them for their service. Apollo, with his steady, confident walk, seemed to know that he had become a symbol of loyalty and protection. During a break, Camilla sat on a bench in the square and observed the movement around. Apollo lay at his feet, relaxed but alert. As she looked at the city she loved so much, Camilla realized she had found a new balance. Her and Apollo's mission was not just to catch criminals, but to live each day with purpose, cherishing the little moments and bonds they built together. "I think now we understand what really matters, don't you, Apollo?" she said, smiling. Apollo responded with a slight wag of his tail, as if silently agreeing. They had gone through an ordeal that would change their lives forever, but most importantly, they came out of it stronger and more united than ever. Camilla knew that challenges would continue to arise, but with Apollo by her side, she was ready to face them. No matter what the future brought, as long as they were together, there was no obstacle too great. The days that followed brought new challenges, but also moments of joy and redemption for Camilla and Apollo. The journey to recovery had been arduous, but each step taken together made them more than just a police officer and her working dog. They were life partners, bound by a deep, unshakable connection. Camilla cautiously resumed her work at the police station. Now, she knew how to balance the pressure of duty with the importance of taking care of herself and her partner. Apollo was always by his side, following his every movement, alert and disciplined. In the corridors of the police station, he was treated like a hero, and every police officer who passed by made a point of greeting him. "It's not just us who owes him something. Apollo showed us what true loyalty means," commented one of the veteran police officers. Camilla knew that Apollo had been more than essential in her physical and emotional recovery. Their lives now followed a lighter rhythm, where small gestures became daily celebrations. A simple walk in the park, a coffee with colleagues or a walk around the city were experiences that previously went unnoticed. Now, every moment was made the most of. One afternoon, Camilla and Apollo were invited to participate in a community event where she would share her story. The square was full of children, families and police officers. Camilla took the stage, with Apollo by her side. As he looked at the people gathered there, he felt a wave of gratitude. "I was very close to losing everything," she began, her voice calm. "But I learned that what really matters is who is by our side in the most difficult times. And I was lucky to have Apollo. Without him, I wouldn't be here." Warm applause filled the square, and Apollo, feeling his owner's pride, wagged his tail. Camilla bent down and wrapped the German shepherd's head in an affectionate hug, hearing the barking of the children who watched in awe. The event ended with smiles and thanks, but for Camilla, the real reward was in the bond she shared with Apollo. That night, back home, Camilla sat in the backyard with Apollo by her side. The stars shone in the sky, and the silence of the night enveloped the city. She stroked Apollo's soft fur and smiled. "I think we can say we won, right?" she said in a soft tone. Apollo let out a slight whine and placed his head on her lap, as if to say that yes, they had won. Camilla knew that the future would still bring challenges, but she also knew that she didn't need to face anything alone. With Apollo by his side, each obstacle would be just more proof that together they were invincible. As the tiredness of the night set in, Apollo remained by her side, alert, as always. Camilla closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that, no matter what happened, he would always have his faithful companion by his side. And so, under the starry sky and with hearts at peace, Camilla and Apollo continued together, ready for any adventure that life still had in store for them. United forever.